so much for being here. Again, sorry for the delay, but we're really thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here with this fabulous set of panelists to talk about Amber's work. And I'll just briefly introduce us. I'm Sarah Gordon. I'm a museum specialist in visual art at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Some of you know me from my previous work at the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, where I was curator. And I've been around. I've been at the National Gallery, done some work at the AU Museum. I've taught at GW, AU, so I've been in the art scene here for a little while. And we have three fabulous panelists today. You probably all know Amber Robles-Gordon, who has over 15 years of exhibiting and art education and exhibition coordination experience. She's shown her work in the US, of course, as well as Germany, Italy, Malaysia, London, and Spain. Amber has also created public art installations, which I love as a former public art person, still a public art person, at Howard University, Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the DC Department of General Services, among other places. She's also taught workshops, given commentary, presented her work, again, in numerous places, the Smithsonian Anacostia Museum, the David Driscoll Center, National Museum of African American History and Culture. Amber's also a wonderful advocate for the DC area arts community. She was an active member, maybe you still are, of Black Artists of DC, and is also the co-founder of Delusions of Grandeur Artist Collective. So welcome, Amber.
I'm actually the co-founder. There were others.
Oh, great, co-founder. Jack Rasmussen has been director and curator at the American University Museum, the Katzen Art Center, since 2005. And there he hosted Amber's 2021 exhibition called Successions, Traversing U.S. Colonialism. Jack has also served as executive director of Maryland Art Place in Baltimore, and executive director of DeRosa, a contemporary art museum in Napa, California. He helped to launch Rockville Arts Place. He was an assistant director at Washington Project for the Arts when it opened in 1975. So Jack is really a fount of information and history of the DC art scene.
Really old, I think.
So, and then Jack also has a PhD in anthropology from AU, which is a connection with our third panelist, Maria Amelia Viteri, who has her PhD in anthropology from AU. Maria is now a research associate with the Department of Anthropology at University of Maryland College Park. And she has published extensively in both English and Spanish for academic audiences and the media. Her work revolves around structural inequalities as mutually constitutive with gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and immigration in the US, Latin America, Caribbean, and the Global South. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I don't know how many of you have already had a chance to spend some time with this series or heard the origin story for this series, but I think it's worth repeating if Amber wouldn't mind, because I think the origin story says a lot about how you can understand this, because the origin story spans about 150 years. When I spoke with Amber, she initially started talking to me about the killing of Cecil the lion, which happened in 2015. This was a lion who was living in a national park in Zimbabwe. It was part of a long-term study at Oxford University, and was shot with a bow and arrow by an American dentist and hunter. And actually, the lion suffered for quite a long time before it finally passed away. Yeah. And it caused kind of international outrage and got a lot of attention. The other kind of starting point for this exhibition or for this series is came from a young girl, Maria Amelia Viteri, who in 1874 in Manhattan was abused by her adoptive mother, and the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals brought a case for her to protect her, which eventually led to the creation of the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children later that year. So if you just want to comment on how these two, you know, things that happened so far apart informed your decision to start this series, that would be great.
So I remember in 2015 when Cecil was killed, and there was, and of course I felt, you know, I don't like hunting, period. I think we've made it acceptable, we made it a sport, and I think there's something wrong with that when we're talking about animal lives. You know, animals, albeit they deserve to be valued, treated, respected. So, but I say that at the same time, I remember when he passed, when he was killed, and I remember the outpour of the various people, and some were celebrities, and ended up like famous people, that were being shared. And I just remember the sentimentality just was so fervent, it was so blatant, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but what also bothered me was that we're talking about from 2012 to 2013, 14, there were various black and brown lives that were taken, killed by police officers. And you didn't see the same outpour of sentimentality to these human lives. And that just never sat right with me. And I'm not saying I went back and saw statistical information about the way that people posted on Facebook and they, at that point, but there's a feeling, there's a heaviness that comes along with seeing people like you not being valued, period. And I tend to, when I talk about people, I don't just talk about people that are like specifically Latino, a certain part of, you know, African descent that I am. I try and talk about people of color, because in our society, anti-blackness or anti-melanin it's embedded in everything that our world has brought to us, period. Okay, so I began looking for ways in which to formulate this conversation and then translate into a visual, you know, series of artwork. And I went looking for things about the Bible, things about societal norms, and that led me, and then I think it was the Mexican, when Trump instituted some of the Mexican recent immigrant rules or laws, and started caging Mexicans in literal animal cages. And I just remember feeling like this can't be real. I can't really be watching this. This can't really be happening. So then I was like, because to me, it's like, this is immoral. Like, how could we justify this? So that led me into a conversation about researching justice and morality. And then I thought, okay, how does our society, how does our world, what is the progression, the historical progression of how we value life? And then I broke it down, you know, children's life, women's life, animal life. And that's what led me to Maria Amelia Viteri. And very specifically, the fact that there was there were laws in place about animal life and using an excess of lives to feed us, basically. And then the treatment in which we transitioned animal life to food. There were laws that referenced that, but there was laws about how the abuse of children could not go beyond a certain level. However, at the same time, this is some of the contradictions that I try and pull out in the work, and even when I talk about the work. Although that law existed, women and children were still considered property. So that the law was up to the discretion of the police. So if the police didn't want to go any further, the case didn't go any further. So contradictions, why have laws in place if then you give the control to the police in that instance, and they're not required to act to take it any forward? Yes, so I think that's when I came back and started to create this body of work. It was, I've been holding on to that since 2015. So,
Yeah, I think what I would love to do to kind of understand how you then brought all of those things that you were thinking about into your visual art
yeah.
is to look, maybe to first talk generally about the composition of these pieces. I mean, if you look around the room, you can see very clearly some consistency, right, in the composition. And some of it really references, I think, or sort of echoes some of your earlier work. So it would be great to hear both you and Jack maybe talk about this as far as how you were thinking about the composition, some of the things that are repeated, the horizontal bands of color, the totem-like form in the middle, the glow, the fabric, and the puppies, the fence, all those things. And also, Jack, kind of how you, when you look at this newest body of work, because I know you've been engaged with Amber's work for many years, how you see it drawing on what she's done previously and or moving in new directions.
Well, I could talk a little bit about, what brought me to Amber's work in the first place. And, there's so much going on here, right? And I came at it from an entirely different place. I came on it as she was experimenting with ways to do installations with all these interesting materials, And so that was really I was excited by what she was doing. She was doing different things differently. She was installing in the corners of rooms or, from the ceiling. And of course, there was this aspect of, the work was beautiful, colorful. And it's only after you, spend some time with it that you go down into, through the layers that you see that there's so much rich happening here, so much that, it's just whatever doorway you take to, get into the work, mine was, composition and color and materials, there's so much to find there. And so that's, and then to see the work that she did for us 3 years ago, and then to see where she is now. There's a kind of a progression there, but she's also, I think, I'd be interested to hear where you start, because I sense that you're really involved in sort of physical, material, the color and the textures and things like that, and that you eventually arrive at these just powerful statements. But I think tell me if I'm wrong, at core, you're really into beauty, and that's sort of where it starts.
So it's funny because when you're saying what I'm really into beauty, I love creating. That is my joy. And it so happens that we live in a society where I feel like I can't just create, because I've been really fortunate that this is one of the ways in which I try to impact things that are outside of myself and inform and so
it's just too much to do.
Well, yeah.
Too much
I mean, to some
needs to be done.
To some
Needs to
extent.
be said.
But I really feel like this is one of my passions. Not only to create aesthetically appeasing or pleasing things, but to inform, to push boundaries. Because I try not to only speak for myself, from my own perspective. It's like my form of journalism to some extent. So the other thing is that I struggle with how to present information. Like, I don't stick to one particular, as you mentioned. I absolutely do installations not all the time, but I don't just stick to one medium to convey my concerns. But I also, especially when it comes to figuration and then dealing with some of the issues, the very sometimes ugly issues. We're talking about killing of and or abusing, raping, pillaging of people, of a type of people, for hundreds of years. And in this work, I'm referring to colonialism and imperialism. So I'm not just talking about one specific group of colored people. So when I said I often struggle, I struggle because I can't. Could I make more work that expressed this subject matter more specifically by using the black and brown bodies in violent situations, and it be more convincing, and you connect very instantly with what I'm trying to convey? I absolutely could, but I will not, because I will not contribute to what's already out in our society from generation to generation to generation. I will not contribute to the trauma. That's it's like my totem pole, my spine will not allow me to do that. So, which makes it more work, but that's where the layers come from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I want people, as they come closer, as they investigate, to unpeel back what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I think that I could have phrased it a little more artfully. This attracts you to it. It's the beauty, the sensuousness, everything draws you in.
Yeah.
And then when you get in, you're caught. You know?
And I think, when you said I can't just create, like I this is what I do, I create things, that's what I love, but I can't just create. And I think the idea that artists are just creating is that ever really the case? I mean, it's, as an art historian, I think, well, there was the art for art's sake movement back in the 19th century, but really, I mean, in the history of art making and creating objects and things of beauty, there's almost always a functional aspect to them as well, right? And a sort of aspect of them that is somehow ingrained in their social and cultural fabric. So, but it's interesting to hear a practicing artist try to explain what that feels like, right?
Well,
to want to create, but also want to bring all of these issues in.
Well, Amber's here working in Washington, D.C., the birthplace, home of Washington Color School.
Yeah.
A lot of artists, purely formal, weren't addressing other issues. Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm gonna cough for a while.
No, and it's wonderful to be able to bring that history, which I
Yeah,
think we do, and also all these other issues. And I want to bring Maria into the discussion as an anthropologist, and we'll come back to the images and again look more closely at them, because I think close looking at these is crucial. I think soaking up the appearance as a whole is also wonderful, but we'll come back and look more closely. But Maria, I want to kind of bring you into it because, Amber talks about, again, all of these different things that she wants to address: capitalism and child welfare and animal cruelty and global anti-blackness or anti-melanin, as you say, civil rights, Black Lives Matter. It's a lot, right? I think we all had that response, like, wow, this is incredible what she's taking on. But at heart, and I think you addressed this, Amber, is kind of this idea of who is worthy of care. Isn't the value of life and well-being inherent? That comes from the statement for this project. And so Maria, I want to turn to you and just ask you, as an anthropologist who focuses on migration, which is something Amber looks at, but also and gender, just kind of how you see this work. What is it saying about global life, indigenous life, animal life, from your perspective?
No, thanks. First, thanks. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And we have been talking before with Amber. I really, really appreciate, as an anthropologist, it's harder, I feel like it's harder to layer the connections and the discussions in art than what you do in a book, for example. So something that I was drawn towards Amber's work is precisely that, the layering. And here I'm thinking about, if we take coloniality, which is something that I've been also grappling with as an anthropologist, and how colonial wounds and those legacies, in one way or another, play out in our everyday lives. And then I feel like Amber clearly show us how we are all marked in different ways though, right? Because my colonial wounds are going to be different than Amber's, right? Than yours or Jack's or any of you in the audience, but we all have in one way or another wounds. And intersecting those with, as you were saying, tradition of discrimination against specific peoples, people of colors, or people coming from a specific geography or a specific ethnicity, and you can fill in the blank, right? Because we have a long list, unfortunately. That unpacking and that unfolding, for me, connects the mechanisms and linkages to kind of remind us what has been forgotten. Because colonialism and coloniality could be very abstract for many. And for others, it's your lived experience daily. It's your lived experience of discrimination. It's your lived experience of exclusion. If you are, for example, Latino immigrant in the United States, and we can move geographies, especially nowadays with new or exacerbated conflicts in our world. And so as an anthropologist now, particularly in this period of my academic career, I'm always coming back to me because I feel like, in a sense, that if I'm unable to look at my own biases, my own informed colonial biases, then it's harder for me to deconstruct or decolonize, right? Now, decolonization is a buzzword in the States, in Europe, everywhere. Let's decolonize it all. Like, sure, right? It's hard. So what's the process of decolonizing? For me, it starts with our own selves and looking around and kind of interrupting our own biases. Because not because I come from Ecuador, is my original country. I have two countries, right? Very fortunate in that way. But then what classist, sexist, racist, LGBT-phobic legacies or scripts might I be unconsciously reproducing in this geography? If I don't see those, I normalize those. But if I see them, I can interrupt them and I can intervene, right? That's what I used to tell my students when I was a professor or at conferences or even in my applied anthropological work. What does that mean to, as Amber was saying, unfolding, unpacking? It's easier to unpack something that is outside ourselves, right? But when you start unpacking your own self, then is when the real work, for me, starts. And for me, art has always had the power of moving people. It's so much easier to do this unpacking and folding and these intersections of race, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, immigration, and all the things that no one wants to talk about, right? And that's what I do. I talk about all the uncomfortable things, sometimes in the most diplomatic way, depending on what's my audience, right? To get people to unpack, like sexual abuse, like animal cruelty. As human beings, our human condition is the tendency, or when we are the happiest, is when we have human dignity, when we belong, when we have a community, when we're acknowledged, when we're seen. So how do we come from outside of our comfort zones and try to do that work? Because I feel like, especially in the United States, or even in my home country, Latin America, it's so easy to stay in your bubble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in order to get outside your bubble, you have to like put some extra work. In Washington DC is this amazing city, I feel, to really meet people that otherwise I would have never met in Ecuador. I feel so fortunate. But then it's also about wanting to do that unpacking. So I would love to highlight How? By looking at, yeah, aesthetically beautiful, definitely, first, and then unpacking these layers, and then how these layers are constructed to create certain perceptions, narratives, and then how we act, who we are in the world, and how do we want to show up in the world. So much easier than reading one of my books, right? So looking at Amber's incredible work, it already gives you lots of hints. And it's gonna be so much easier to relate to that, you know, reads my desbordes, my cartografías, my untranslatable colonial wounds. What is that? Right? So I just love the fact that art, anthropology, history of art, and can all be in conversation, and we can all contribute to this unpacking, unfolding of whatever you want to call it. There are so many terms, right? Capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, neo-colonialism. Then again, the list is very long. Patriarchy, heteronormativity, whatever framework or I usually call it as an infrastructure. Whichever infrastructure of meaning is calling you, doesn't really matter, as long as we all understand who we are and how we can, again, interrupt at least some of these problematic intersections, right, that Amber brings to light.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you talk about kind of addressing yourself and your own, you know, history and biases, and then looking outward. I think, Amber, in your work, you have done both. I mean, you've had some projects where you have looked at yourself, your own history, your language, you know, your ancestry, right? And then others like this, where you're looking outward at kind of everything else. And so, you know, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, or if you want to kind of start looking more closely at some of these works of art. We'd love to hear both of those things from you.
Sure. So, okay, I will start to do, like, structurally. You know, there's 6 panels, they're all mixed media on wood, and they absolutely have threads in relationship to the Successions Traversing U.S. Colonialism series, which were the double-sided quilts, where I'm looking at the ill treatment of the U.S. government to its millions of citizens in the U.S. territories. And on the front, I dissected either the territory's seal or their flag, and then on the back, I give an interpretation of their energy, their spiritual energy. So I say all that to say that some of the connective tissues is the totem-like tree form in the middle. It's actually, I went ahead and used the same material that was purchased in Puerto Rico, and it's an upholstery material, it's a heavier material, and it is absolutely a continuing conversation about humanity, trying to connect us to the way that we present information about our genealogy, the way that we present information about our specific genealogy, our family trees, but also genealogically in relationship to the fact that we are all human beings on this daggone planet. So I did that through the middle of each works. And then you have a series of spears, you know, or circular forms, and I always like to say, you know, I believe in spiritual magic, I believe in earth-based magic, and I believe in intention in terms of what you focus on can manifest. So I try to bring things that I care for, things that I'm concerned about, things that I want to project and or relate to others in a circle. So that's why you'll see the things that I am trying to bring to your foremost attention, they'll be in the circle. So you have the outer circle, and some of them I'm specifically using what's called a aviary. It's a fabric, and I want to say that it's like a British and or European fabric that was based there. And it usually, aviary is basically it's like people that paid attention to the progression and or lives of birds and the collection of birds. And I use it specifically as I'm pointing out that really are birds meant to be put in cages? I'm just saying. So once I realized that using that fabric would also have an added layer of, yes, I'm saying human beings, look at your behavior. And then others, I specifically use materials that are, just for aesthetic value. But okay, so you have the outer sphere, then you have the inner sphere. With the inner sphere, I'm very specifically referencing imagery of the continents, our whole world, our globe. But then I embed statistics that are specific to the overall idea or concept that I'm conveying in each work. So for example, let me think of one. I believe one of them has, capitalism has, so one is in the slave patrol, fund all communities, and that inner sphere or inner globe has statistics about the police killings in the United States. So no, you can't just go up and read it, but it's there. Has to be aesthetically pleasing as well, so I have to balance those things. And then, I absolutely, there is below the black line, in each work there is a black line. And the information that I want you to, of course, take in, but I want you to see is that it's information and or behaviors that are absolutely in question. And that we all should think of them in question. So I start with slavery and I bring you up contemporary magnifying glass of what I want you to focus on as positive. So I come from the negative, I bring you, at least attempt to bring you into a positive view. So on the bottom you have slavery, you have end the slave patrol, fund all communities, you have slavery, you have the transatlantic journey, or I can't remember the specific term, but you literally have the diagrams of the slave ships. And then I bring you into representations of the slave patrol and the patrolling of slaves that were trying to run away, escape. And then I give you representations of the mechanisms in which have influence and have not. They have not gone anywhere. They have morphed, they have changed, they have figured out different ways to control and to impede people of colors and their progress. But the Ku Klux Klan is there. The militarization of the police department, and that is there. And then I bring you up, and one of the things that I try to do, in the ones that I'm actually using protest signs, I specifically am looking for people that are not looking like or of me. I wanted you to see, the viewer, to see that these are views of a various range of people. But specifically, I was looking for people that were white or Caucasian, and I'm so glad that they've been there, and that I could borrow their imagery in that way, because it's going to take so many of us to continue to change these perceptions and behaviors that are not conducive to anybody. Then the last thing I'm going to focus on is the flag-like, the bars of polychromatic, color. It's in one sense meant to, of course, accentuate that, bring your attention to the sphere, the larger sphere, but also it's about connecting you to a flag-like condition. It's about connecting you to home, giving you a sense of patriotism. And I say that because of the reference to the flag, but also landscape. Both of those things brings people into those feelings of home, feeling of safety, feeling of belonging. I think that was
that's amazing. I mean, so that's kind of, and you can see those echoes all around this room. The lower part, the totem, the circle, the upper part, the flag, the stripes, and you got into some of the more detail about the and police what is the title again?
And the Slave Patrol fund all communities.
And there's a couple of other ones here that maybe we can look in a little more closely. Maria and I were just saying that this one, Whose World Is This? We both think is a really strong piece. That sort of like how we talked about your inspiration for this series was both something that happened back in the 19th century and something that happened, just a couple years ago. This piece, I think, brings in these histories, these layers of history to see kind of how did we get here? How have bodies been measured and analyzed and contained over the years? So I don't know, maybe either one of you want to say something about this piece here.
I don't know, it's up to you.